Hi everyone, welcome again to another lecture from Intro to Public Speaking. Today I want to talk to you about different kinds of styles of delivery. Now delivery is what a lot of people get hung up on when it comes to public speaking. And they freak out if they miss a word or forget a sentence or whatever it might be. And I'm here to tell you that certainly delivery is important, and we'll talk about that as we kind of go through, but when it comes to your actual grades, delivery is actually a minor part. Delivery only accounts for about 20 to 25% of your grade, whereas the content, the basic structure, a full introduction, body and conclusion, having clear previews, thesis statements, significance, all that kind of stuff, to me is much, much, much more important than whether or not you screw up a word or not. That said, effective delivery is extremely important. And so when we're talking about delivery, one of the things that we think about are some of the great speakers that have kind of captured the imagination of people in, say, the 20th, 21st century, 19th, whatever it might be. You think about speakers like President Obama. President Obama, you could certainly make the argument, one of the reasons why he was elected president in 2008 was because of his oratorical performance in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention. Whereas some people who aren't as good at delivery, like former President George Bush, were often considered to be dumb or inadequate when it came to the presidency. That's certainly not true of President Bush. He wasn't dumb by any means. He actually graduated from some of the top universities in America, but disfluencies in your delivery can certainly have an impact. So I want to talk about the different kind of styles of delivery that go into making a good speech. We'll talk a little bit then afterwards about kind of some of the mechanics of that, what I expect, and then in another video I'll actually go over what I specifically expect in your initial informative speeches, and then we can certainly go from there, and I can entertain any kind of questions over email or phone calls or whatever it might be. So when we're talking about this particular chapter, we're talking about the importance of effective delivery. The bulk of what we're going to talk about are the 5 modes of delivery, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, hopefully, you're practicing your speeches. And all of you should be practicing them before you give them before an audience ahead of time. Isocrates, who's one of my favorite ancient philosophers, not Socrates, but Isocrates, and who kind of really established a lot of the parameters we talk about when it comes to public speaking, said that when it comes to public speaking, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't practice, you aren't going to do very well. So it's kind of like in real estate. They say the 3 rules of real estate are location, location, and location. You could make the argument, or I would say that the 3 rules of public speaking are practice, practice, practice. So make sure that you're practicing ahead of time. But again, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. Okay, so certainly effective delivery can connect the speaker to your audience. If you ever want a visual example of this, if you've seen the movie Billy Madison, which is one of my favorite movies from the 1990s, at the very end of the movie, Billy Madison is they're doing an academic decathlon. Billy Madison is given a question, and he says something to the effect of, well, this reminds me of the puppy who lost his way. And he proceeds to give this answer in a very kind of eloquent way. But the truth is, it's all BS. And if you take a look at it, they pan to the audience and so forth, and 2 of his best friends are like nodding in agreement, like this is the greatest presentation they've ever seen before. It's amazing how many people are mesmerized by presentation, especially that's really, really good, when in reality they're probably not saying that much. And that was true of Billy Madison, and that's true of a lot of presentations, where the content isn't really there. And again, I would prefer they have really, really good content and not be as good on the delivery side, and then you can improve that as we kind of go through. Certainly it encourages the audience to believe that the speaker cares for them. If you're passionate about what you're talking about, hopefully you come to see that in these videos, not only that I'm fat, but also that I care about the subject. I want you to do well. Public speaking is something that's really, really important to me, and it's been an important part of my life for almost 3 decades now. Natural, conversational, and spontaneous are certainly the most important, and we'll talk about that when we get into spontaneous delivery. But just a specific kind of tip for you when you're giving your own speeches, if you're nervous, even if you're speaking in front of people that you know, one of the things you might want to do is pick out someone in the audience and pretend that you're having a conversation with them. just talk to them, and say, hi, in your head, you're going to say, well, I'm going to talk to my dad, and I'm going to tell him about McDonald's and how it came about to be the corporation that it is today, or whatever it might be. Having that conversation with someone that you pick out will actually lend a lot of gravitas to your presentation, and it will relax you as you're kind of moving forward. Okay, so we're talking about the 4 modes of delivery. I'll go into this a little bit more detail and so forth. But they are memory, manuscript, impromptu, and extemporaneous. Okay? When it comes to memory, if you remember that first lecture that we talked about, not the first lecture, well, it is actually the first lecture. When it comes to the history and the basics of public speaking, you remember we went over what are called the 5 canons of rhetoric, and one of those canons is what is known as memory. Memory is the one that's used the least often, because today we have teleprompters and we have computers and so forth, and we can make notes. When 2,500 years ago, writing on paper is extremely expensive. In fact, most of the writing that's done is done on vellum or animal skin and so forth, which is very, very expensive to produce. You don't have a lot of people who can understand the written word, but practically everybody can understand language, and so the way that you pass down stories and so forth is certainly through oral discourse and the kind of the memorization. We talked about it before in previous lectures when I talked about the idea of culture, about how in different kinds of societies, the storytellers, the people who are the keepers of those stories, are often considered to be the most important people in that particular village, and certainly was the case when it came to ancient Athens and Greece and other city-states, and certainly as we move forward, those people who are the repositories of our stories, up until we have a lot more printed books, really become the most important people. And at that time, they had to memorize all of that kind of content, all of that material. We don't necessarily have that anymore. If you want to memorize your speeches, I would certainly encourage you to do so, because it actually makes you look really, really polished. And as you move forward, especially if you get into sales or you do other presentations, you're more than likely going to have some kind of presentation. As you do it more and more, you'll actually have something that you use all the time that will be memorized. If you're a teacher, you'll often have things that are being memorized, because you're going to do some kind of lesson that's constantly the same. I mean, you can only talk about math or reading or history in a particular way, in different ways, over certain different degrees over a certain amount of time. A lot of the things that you're going to use are going to be stock facts, issues, and so forth, and a lot of what you're going to do are probably going to be memorized. Like, I can give this lecture in my sleep because this is a pretty conventional lecture that I've given on more than dozens of occasions, and I talk about this kind of notion all the time. When we're talking about a second mode, we're talking about the idea of manuscripts. Now, manuscripts can actually be really good. For your first speeches, I don't actually mind if you use a manuscript. The problem with a manuscript are twofold. One, the manuscript becomes a security blanket for you, and you actually don't look up. You have what is called the peekaboo moment. In other words, you're just looking at your script the entire time. You might look up at the audience, woo, peekaboo, okay? And that becomes especially problematic when students are actually doing that in my classrooms and so forth, and they're speaking in front of an audience. That peekaboo moment is something that's a common trope throughout the semester. So one of the advantages of doing public speaking online is forcing students to actually use only note cards. It actually forces you to get away from the notion of a manuscript. Because again, I would encourage you to write all of your speeches out, but I would encourage you not to use the manuscript method for your primary mode of delivery. The reason for that, again, becomes a security blanket, and you don't engage us with your eyes, with your voice, and you become really, really monotone when you just read the speech. It doesn't actually provide us really kind of a captivating performance in any way. The third is known as impromptu. Now, impromptu in public speaking has 2 different modes of understanding. One is actually a type of speaking. Impromptu speaking is actually a competitive activity within the stuff that I was doing in college when I was coaching and actually competing in the activity. And that involves where you actually are like given a quotation or something, and you actually have to give a speech within, say, like 7 minutes. Impromptu as a mode of delivery is essentially off the cuff. It's where you don't have any preparation whatsoever and you just go up there and you wing it. And if you are one of those people who are just going to try to go up there, 99% of the time it's just not going to work. You're going to have to start, you're going to start over, you're going to forget your words, you're going to forget your places. If you don't have any notes whatsoever, you just kind of get up there and speak, it's not going to serve you very well. And your audience can tell if you're kind of in impromptu mode. You're going to talk in some kind of circular logic. Every once in a while, that can work for someone, but that's usually for someone who's done this presentation before, and it's much more polished than ever before. And in reality, they've gotten probably a much more memorized presentation than they actually do impromptu. So I highly recommend that you stay away from impromptu when it comes to styles of delivery. Extemporaneous speaking is the preferred method. And extemporaneous speaking, by the time we get to the end of the semester, is what all of you have to do. Extemporaneous is essentially the idea of limited notes. In other words, you limit yourself to, say, a couple of note cards or some items on a one sheet of paper where this just kind of jogs your memory. It becomes much more conversational. It allows you to be yourself. It allows you to, in some respects, not talk off the cuff, but, improvise in how you're going to present yourself. The problem with the manuscript is that, often the way we write and we speak are two different things, whereas extemporaneous provides a much more natural way for you to get into the rhythm of speaking. The problem with extemporaneous is that sometimes you do what I call editorializing. In other words, what you do is you present all the information that you have and then you drone on about something else. You expand that topic. You can find this most when it comes to in different parts of the speech, for example, in like conclusions. Instead of just discussing what you've put forward, first I've talked about how McDonald's became a corporation, then I talked about the Big Mac, and finally I talked about the brand new fries that they have. I don't even know if they have fries, but whatever the hell it is. The point is you do that and then you bring it back down to your introduction. What happens is that you will go off one of those or two of those points and you kind of go on for 45 seconds to a minute. You'll introduce new information into your conclusion that doesn't need to be there. And that's where you get into that extemporaneous speaking. You don't think you've talked long enough. And so you want to avoid that as much as possible. So it's a good combination to have to start by writing out your manuscript, practice with your manuscript, and then transpose some key important points to some note cards, and then you practice extemporaneously as you're moving forward. You're probably going to have to practice your speeches, on more than just one occasion. You're probably going to have to do this a number of different times in front of a mirror, whatever it might be, in order to do that correctly. So let's actually go to the idea of when it comes to different kinds of practice, okay? So here are some different kinds of tips for you. Don't skip, use visual aids, so on and so forth. You can read these items, but let me give you some ideas that I found throughout, different kind of presentations. One of the good things is that you are going to have to stand before your audience. You cannot actually, sit down and so forth. You're going to have to stand up before your audience. One of the things you want to do is you want to have a good base. You want to, have your feet apart. You want to have your note cards in front of you. If you're going to gesture, I suggest you do so, but you gesture above your waist. You don't gesture below your waist. The reason for that is because if you are, you get really, really nervous, it looks like you're treading water or you're a bird, those kinds of gestures. I think it's okay to gesture as, it's just kind of part of who you are. That's certainly okay. So when you're thinking about, engaging your delivery, one of the things that, some people have a problem is that they talk really, really fast. So one of the things that you can do to train the muscles around your mouth and so forth is to over-articulate your words when you are speaking. Because what happens is when we're giving a presentation is we can get really, really nervous, we start talking really, really fast, and then what we do is we stumble over our words and then it just can potentially snowball from there. So one of the things that you want to do is say you're approaching your audience, someone in your audience is taping you, you say, "Hi, I'm Jason, this is my informative speech. they pan to the camera, you take a look at your audience, wonderful, and you say, and then you kind of begin your presentation. So you want to stand in front of your audience. You want to have your note cards or small pieces of paper or whatever you're using for your speech in your left or your right hand. It's important that you don't shift or move. Guys, don't put your hands in your pockets. Ladies, don't do this. Okay, stand up straight. Your parents taught you good posture for a reason. When you're actually engaging in the speech itself, try to actually, if you're nervous, have a conversation with, again, someone in the audience. Try to use an extemporaneous mode, style of delivery. Again, for the first speech, if you do go with a manuscript, that's okay. But know that you're probably going to be graded down a little bit because, again, a lot of what happens is that students, they look at their manuscript instead of looking at their audience and engaging with your audience. If your audience is spread out across the room, you should actually try to engage them. Look over here, look over here, look over there. And certainly, of course, they're not going to have a wide room like we're in a classroom. Unless you decide to do your speech here at Bridgewater State, you're more than welcome to do so. Find a classroom and actually record yourself there. If we were working with a podium and so forth, I'd give you some other tips and tools. The podium can actually be a good thing and a bad thing because it's a place to put your notes, but it also can be a bad thing because you can see people leaning on the podium. They're doing this. Ladies, especially, this is you. I don't know how this is comfortable, but you love doing this. You love sticking your hip out. Gentlemen, don't think you're any better because you like to put your hands in your pockets. You like to lean on the podium a lot more. I'm not sure how that's comfortable, but it hurts my back when I do it. So when you're thinking about delivery, there are some important things you want to think about. Again, extemporaneous speaking is the more preferred style of delivery. Practice ahead of time. Practice both with a manuscript and then transpose that into kind of, just note cards. Make sure that you stand with a good base. You have a conversation with potentially an audience member. If you want to have a conversation, it's certainly in the mirror as you're kind of moving forward. The good thing about extemporaneous speaking, also you don't run into kind of a monotone style of speaking. I'll show you some different speeches that potentially have that, but most of the time you don't have that issue. You're pretty animated when you're presenting to your audience. The more excited about your topic, the better. And we'll talk more about that kind of stuff as we go over for the next few weeks with both your informative, persuasion, and your hero introductions. Certainly, if you have any questions about your delivery or would like me to, again, take a look at your speeches ahead of time or give you some points or tips, I'm more than happy to do so. Please just email me or call me as soon as you can. Have a good day, guys. Bye.